The Hanania Show is brought to you by the U.S. Arab Radio Network and sponsored by Arab News Newspaper, the Middle East's leading English language publication, with print and online editions in Saudi Arabia, Dubai, France, Japan, Pakistan, England, and the United States. Listen to live radio every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern in Detroit, Washington, D.C., New York, and Ontario, Canada. Or watch the live broadcast on Facebook.com/Arab News. The Hanania Show is rebroadcast in Chicago at 12 noon on Thursday. For more information on the radio stations, live Facebook broadcast, and podcasts, visit ArabNews.com. And now, here's your host, columnist and U.S. Special Correspondent for Arab News, Hanania.
And good afternoon, everybody. It's June 1, 2022, and I'm your host, Hanania. And we're broadcasting live in Detroit, Washington, D.C. And tomorrow we'll rebroadcast again in Detroit at 7 a.m. and Thursday in Chicago at 12 noon on 1080 AM radio, which is a pretty big station that covers all of the 6-county region around Chicago. So it is a big audience. And we're adding a couple more radio stations in the next few weeks. We have a few more, and we hope to get that off the ground. Today, we're going to focus on elections and politics, first on two issues. First, with Michigan political consultants Dennis Denno and Bill Ballenger in segment one, looking at the August 2 primary election contests in several Michigan congressional races, Huwaida Arraf in the 10th, Andy Levin in the 11th, Rashida Tlaib in the 12th, and John Conyers III in the 13th. And in segment two, at the bottom of the hour, we'll speak with Illinois Congressman Sean Casten, who's running in the new 6th Illinois House District for re-election in the June 28th Illinois Democratic primary against Congresswoman Marie Newman. Dennis Denno is president in this segment, is president of Denno Research, which he founded in 2004. For over 30 years, he's helped candidates and elected officials shape issues and conduct polling on important races and issues. We talked many times on the radio show. Dennis, welcome to the program. And Bill Ballenger, he's the founder of Inside Michigan Politics, a state-based biweekly subscription newsletter launched in 1987 and published for 27 years. He now publishes the Ballenger Report. Welcome, you guys. Let me just mention to Bill, we got to get your video to turn sideways. I think we got you at a 90-degree angle. Or is it a 100? Yeah, there you go. All right.
Is that better?
Yes, we've straightened you out. Have you ever done that with a political consultant, Dennis? We've kind of straightened out a political consultant.
I think you are the first person to ever straighten out Bill Ballenger.
You think so? I know everybody wants to straighten me out, but it never works. It never works. First of all, welcome, you guys. And Bill, I know this is the first time on the radio. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Michigan is a hot potato when it comes to politics. And of course, for our audience, it has a nice Arab flavor to it. It's like going into a Middle Eastern restaurant, over there. So I don't know let's just throw it in the air and just say, what's the big race coming up, and what are some of the big issues? So I don't know, Dennis, you want to start out and then we'll go to Bill on some of the issues.
I'd like to throw it to Bill. I mean, I think the big race to me is the Michigan governor's race, and that's just so crazy. And I'm curious what Bill Ballenger thinks of all that.
Well, obviously, the governor's race is huge, but I don't know whether Ray wants to focus on those congressional races down in the Detroit area or talk about the statewide races this year. What do you want to do, Ray?
We could talk about the governor's race, a little bit, and then go into the congressional races. If that's the big race, let's talk about it.
Well, when it comes to the governor's race, Gretchen Whitmer, the incumbent Democrat, after one term, looking to be reelected, is cruising along with no opposition in a primary on August 2nd. And she's holding the coats of the combatants on the Republican side who are tearing away at each other and making a spectacle of themselves and damaging the Republican brand and making it all that easier for Gretchen Whitmer to win in November against whichever Republican wins the nomination on August 2nd.
Is that the Trump factor playing into this, or divisions in the Republican Party? I mean, he didn't do bad, did he, in Michigan, the first time he ran?
That is part of it. But, you know, honestly, Ray, and Dennis knows this, the most recent development is who the heck is going to be running for the Republicans in the primary on August 2nd. 10 candidates filed to run. That is a record number in Michigan history, dating back to when we became a state in 1837. But guess what? Maybe half of them will be thrown off the ballot as unqualified because they totally screwed up their petitions, which were rife with fraud. And the Secretary
you mean they
of
get to
State,
scream about voter theft before the election this time instead of after the election? That's novel.
Exactly. Yeah, this is all happening right now.
Wow.
And even right now, as we talk, there is an important deadline today at 5:00 is when petitions to get on the ballot in November have to be filed. They have to be filed at 5:00 today.
Are there any
passed that?
Are there any big names on the Republican side at all? I mean, because, you know, between the August 2nd primary, that's August, September, October, you only got 3 months.
I know, Ray. The big deal is the guy who is megabucks, multimillionaire, Perry Johnson, has already appealed the decision by the state to not allow him to be on the ballot in the Court of Appeals. And today they rejected his appeal. So you know he's going to appeal it to the state Supreme Court. Supposedly, they will have to make a decision by Friday of this week. And then there are 3 other candidates who could also be thrown off the ballot because one is already withdrawn. And one of those 3 is James Craig, the former Detroit police chief, who has been leading in the polls the entire time. He's not a multimillionaire, but he and Johnson are huge names. They're the top 2 contenders in all the polls that have been taken, and they may be thrown off the ballot.
Yikes.
And so you're going to end up with 5 people on the ballot on August 2nd who are not well known at all.
And not a lot of money either to make
not a lot of money. No.
So then Gretchen looks like she has if things go her way, she's just smooth sailing.
It looks that way right now. The Republicans are doing everything they can to screw up any chance whatsoever they might have had.
And then, Dennis, what about now under this big umbrella, the governor's race? You know, there are some interesting, you know, I mean, if these guys that are running for governor don't make it back on, it's kind of a dead story, wouldn't you say? It's going to be pretty much taken for granted that Gretchen will win, right? Both you guys agree, or?
Well, I would disagree with that. It's a pretty competitive state. I would be surprised if Governor Whitmer wins by more than 4 points. I think there's so many unknowns out there. I mean, inflation, the Trump factor, I mean, who knows what's going to happen in the next, 5 months?
Could Trump come in and endorse somebody, put his, kind of give him the, knighthood with his sword?
Not yet, right?
And then boost the candidate. He's done it in a lot of races so far. He could do that again.
Well, Ray, I think if Trump came in on behalf of one candidate, particularly if there are only 5 on the ballot, and particularly, I guess, more. So if there are 10 on the ballot, we don't know at this point, it will help a Republican, whoever he endorses, in a primary. Now, the real question is, if he comes in a big way between the primary and the general election on behalf of the Republican nominee against Whitmer, I think that probably is going to hurt the Republican.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, isn't this is like a midterm election. So, the Republican vote is going to be higher. They're going to be winning congressional seats. Now, I'm not sure about Michigan, but, across the country, they're already predicting that the Republicans will take back the House. They may take back the Senate. It may be close as gun control, abortion issues, are kind of fogging everything up. But that would, I don't know. It sounds like it could help a Republican, especially if Trump were to. Is he the most popular Republican, you think, to influence the Republican race?
Look, he is the most. Trump is the most popular among Republicans. But you got to remember, Republicans are probably only about a third of the electorate. and the other third are Democrats, and the middle third are independents and ticket splitters. And the problem for the Republican nominee for governor is not only do Democrats hate Trump, but independents don't like him either.
Right.
So if Trump is out front and center, thumping the tub for the Republican nominee, and the Republicans are all behind him, and that's great, and he motivates them to get out and vote, fine. But if he's losing the vast majority of the other 2/3 of the electorate, I don't think the Republican nominee can overcome that.
So Gretchen looks like she has a pretty solid base. Dennis, I know you were saying you still think that there's a possibility she could be unseated.
Yeah, there's always. Go ahead, Bill.
Dennis is right that Michigan is a close competitive state, particularly in a non-presidential year. And here's something we should just mention. Gretchen Whitmer is not all that popular in Michigan. There are a lot of people who don't like her. Her job rating is either underwater or 50-50, no better than that. Personal approval is a little better, but she is a very vulnerable governor. She's got a lot of things going against her. If she had an articulate, attractive Republican opponent with money, she could be in real trouble. I think Dennis is right about that. It's just that the Republicans right now, as far as I can see, are doing just about everything they can to screw themselves up.
Yeah. And then these congressional races are important because they kind of reflect the vote across the state. And four of these races I thought were interesting. I mean, maybe they're not, like in the 10th district with Huwaida Arraf, she's running. Does she even have a chance of winning?
In my opinion, no.
Is it because of money?
Yeah, I mean, she's just got too many people in the Democratic primary who are more likely to be the nominee in that 10th district. By the way, that 10th congressional district is the only one where the Republicans really have a chance. They got a probable nominee, John James, who's run for the U.S. Senate twice. They could win that. It's about a 50-50 district. It's a brand new district just created by an independent commission. No incumbent is in it. Andy Levin represented much of it under the old district lines, but he chose to move next door and run against a fellow incumbent, Haley Stevens, in a Democratic primary. In the 11th, 12th, and 13th district down there, the Democrats are going to win in November. It doesn't make any difference who the Republicans nominate. The Republicans are going to lose. The only real mystery is who is going to win, either Levin or Stevens, in one district. Is Rashida Tlaib, the incumbent in another district, the 12th, is she going to survive her primary? I think she will. And then the 13th district is wide open. There's no incumbent, and there are like half a dozen big Democratic names in that, any one of whom might be able to win.
Well, the 13th district has like a Richard J. Daley name, John Conyers III.
Right.
He could. I looked through all. I think there are 9 candidates. I looked through all of them. Conyers is the one that sticks out. Maybe like a sore thumb, they say, because there's a little controversy around him. I'm not sure how well he's going to do. I tried to get him on the radio show. They were going to come on, and I'm not knocking them because we never got a chance to talk. But at the last minute, they said, no, we're not going to put him on radio. And I'm thinking, okay, that tells me there's some issues that they have to deal with.
I don't think in and of himself, John Conyers is no rock star.
Right.
The only reason he's a factor is, as you pointed out,
his name.
The name Conyers is a golden name in that era because John Conyers, the father, served almost a record number of years in Congress, along with John Dingell. So everybody knows the name. But, some of the other names are fairly well known. They're just not as well known as John Conyers.
It's kind of like Chicago in the last mayoral election. We had this kind of goofy candidate, Lori Lightfoot, who had some credentials with all kinds of problems and controversy. But there were so many candidates running, it only took like 30% of the vote. 28%, 30% to win the primary. And once you get in that primary, everybody aligns behind the leader. Dennis, what do you make of these races in the 10th, the 11th, and 12th with, in Rashida's district in the 12th, I read that the Israeli lobby is going to pour $1 million. That sounds like a lot if I were wanting to buy a home or something, but in an election, $1 million isn't really a lot, is it? You'd have to pour in about $5 million if you want to take her out. And I don't think that they have that much. They're spread out all over.
I mean, the problem with taking out Rashida Tlaib is, your top tier candidate is Janice Winfrey. Full disclosure, I did a little work for her congressional campaign. But the problem is for Janice Winfrey, who's the Detroit clerk, is she has two other opponents besides Rashida Tlaib. She has Chanel Jackson and the mayor of Lathrop Village, a small town in Oakland County. So if you're anti-Rashida Tlaib, you're going to split that vote three ways. And excuse me, like you said, $1 million in a Metro Detroit media market doesn't go very far.
Yeah, and so there are four candidates including Rashida in that new district. And you're saying Chanel Jackson probably has do you think she has the most name recognition of the challengers besides Rashida?
No, I would give it to I'd be very surprised if Janice Winfrey doesn't come in second and maybe Chanel third.
So Janice Winfrey was the one you were talking about that's been in public office and is well known.
Yes. Yeah, she's been the Detroit clerk for at least 3 terms. This might be her 4th term. Bill can correct me if I'm incorrect with that. I just don't think she has the horses to unseat Rashida Tlaib. Rashida Tlaib, whatever you think of her, I mean, she's tenacious. She can raise $1.5 million easily. And so I think that's going to be hard for someone like Janice to overcome.
For the Arab vote, which is much bigger, obviously, in the Detroit region and in her district than it is in Chicago, for example, where I'm at. She's a rock star. I mean, she introduced the NECBA resolution, and she doesn't care. There are only 9, co-signers, I guess, that progressives that signed on. But the fact that it was actually presented to Congress in this is what I call, I'm not saying you guys, I'm not going to drag you into my views, but Congress is Israeli occupied territory, but to get that resolution up there is quite an achievement, even if it's not going to go anyplace. But that's all you can expect, on that issue from her. Right. Great ideas that don't go anyplace when it comes to, the Middle East.
It's something, Ray, I've been thinking about, so Rashida is moving into Dearborn and Dearborn Heights, obviously a large Arab American community, and Rashida is very pro-Palestinian. She is Palestinian herself, and that's great. But there's not a lot of Palestinians in Dearborn, not a lot of Palestinians in Dearborn Heights. And it's a predominantly Shiite Muslim community, which she isn't. And I'm not saying, the community is going to look at her that way. But even the mayor of Dearborn finally has an Arab American mayor, and he outraised his opponent. I want to say something like 8-1, and no knock on the current Dearborn mayor, but he only got 55% of the vote in Dearborn. So it's not like the Arab American community is this united front that's going to support, an Arab American candidate no matter what.
Right. I know that the publisher there at the Arab American News, Osama Siblani, who's a friend of mine, it came under fire this week when he made a couple remarks. They want to go after Rashida as somebody supporting terrorism, but I don't think that that's the issue that's going to, win them, their defeat of Rashida. I think Rashida is in a strong position. And out of all these, I think she's guaranteed. And in the 11th district, Andy Levin, he's solid, isn't he? Although you said, Bill, that he's running against another incumbent. Did he choose to do that, or was he pushed into that?
No, he chose to do it. And in fact, a lot of Democrats resent the fact that he did not stay and run in the 10th district, where he would have been an incumbent. And then Haley Stevens could have been an incumbent in the 11th, and they wouldn't have had to run against each other. And Andy Levin probably would give the Democrats a better chance in the 10th than to have a nominee who's not an incumbent win the nomination and then have to face John James. Haley Stevens is a very strong incumbent, in my opinion. And I think she's got a real chance against Andy Levin. I don't think it's any slam dunk he's going to win the nomination.
Right. Why would he do that? Why would he go into, what was the motivation? Do we know?
Apparently, he just considers himself a member of the Oakland County community portion of the district, and he felt more comfortable there. And it's a stronger district for the Democrat who wins the nomination. If he beats Haley Stevens, it's about a 60% Democratic district, where if he stayed in the 10th and won the primary, which he would do, he probably might not even have any competition. Then he would be facing John James in a 50-50 district.
Oh, so John James is probably going to be a strong vote in that, strong candidate in that 10th district.
Probably because he's run twice before.
Mm.
He lost both times. He challenged incumbent U.S. Senators Debbie Stabenow and Gary Peters, but he came relatively close, particularly against Peters in 2020. He only lost by about 2%, and he showed an ability to raise a lot of money. So he'll have the bucks, and whoever the Democrats nominate in that 10th district, they're going to have to raise some money, and the Democrats are really going to have to fight to win that seat.
Aside from the Arab voters, the rest of the voters, everybody focuses on certain issues. You know, for a lot of Arab voters, it's the Middle East issue. But for a lot of non-Arab voters, it's, you know, other issues. What are those big issues that you guys think are driving the election in Michigan?
Everything. When I talk to candidates, and I mean, I'm hearing inflation, I'm hearing gas prices. I mean, people are really frustrated, really upset. You know, and then within Democratic Party circles, it's frustrating that President Joe Biden's polling numbers are so weak.
Now, isn't it normal, though? I mean, in a midterm where a president always kind of drops in popularity, because no president can ever really satisfy the voters, even the ones that elected them in that first, you know, few years. There's always controversy, there's stumbling. Maybe Biden is kind of contributing to it because he's in those upper ages, and, you know, it has a little bit of an impact on him, I think. But gas prices and inflation, I think you're right. In our next segment with Congressman Sean Casten from the 6th District, incumbent, he's going to be running against another incumbent. They were forced into the district. I don't think it was a choice. They had really, that was the only choice for both of them. And I think gas prices and inflation, not the Middle East, are going to be the deciding factors in that race. But we'll talk to him at the bottom of the hour. How bad is it in Michigan with gasoline prices? I mean, we're paying $5.50 a gallon in Illinois.
I think you're worse off than we are. It's bad here, but it's probably around $4.50 rather than $5.50. But we're headed in your direction.
All right. And inflation, it's terrible, right?
Very bad. Bad.
Yeah. And what other issues, any at all, you think that are going to be a driving force in the upcoming election?
Well, there's always speculation that depending on what the U.S. Supreme Court does on the Roe v. Wade abortion issue, that could become a factor. And in fact, I just saw a poll the other day showing that abortion is like number 3 on the list behind inflation and the economy and, you know, things like that. It's, you know, like in 9%, it's not great, but it could become big. Depending on the way the decision goes. And if it does, it's probably going to help the Democrats a little bit, even though they got so much else going against them.
You know, I think it's interesting that, you know, you have this subgroup of voters who feel elections don't matter. You have the subgroup of voters, arguably these white women, suburban women who are independent voters who go both ways. And, you know, when you start talking about taking away abortion access, you start talking about gun issues. How does that affect those two subgroups? And I assume in both cases, it would help the Democrats.
Yeah. So that's why I assume that someone leaked that Roe versus Wade preliminary opinion to impact that election. And I thought, okay, that's going to help Democrats going into the midterm. But now that I think about it, you have the other issue, which I think fogs everything, the gun control issue, this massacre of children in Uvalde, and all the people saying it's because we can get guns. I'll tell you, I invite all those people to come to Chicago and see how long they last in the streets of Chicago, where they're the fourth toughest gun laws in the country. You know, Chicago, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and one other, New York. Those are four toughest, gun laws. And Chicago's, we just had 10 people killed and 50 or 60 people wounded just this past weekend. It's horrible. So all of that abortion rush, I think, it was undermined by this other now gun control issue. I think it kind of weakens the focus. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I think the gun issue is obviously in the last week or two because of these atrocities, in Buffalo and in Uvalde, Texas. Guns have surged to the fore. The question is, what way does it cut in the election? I would tend to think overall it would probably help the Democrats. But I will say the argument you just raised, Ray, is what the gun rights people often offer as a reason why we shouldn't go whole hog for gun control. And that is, some of the jurisdictions that have the toughest gun restrictions in the country suffer the worst gun violence.
Right.
And why is that? It doesn't make any sense. So that is a tough issue in terms of who it might really help in the election.
Yeah, and I think that it can't be just, new tighter restrictions on gun purchasing, because you have gun laws, law-abiding people will follow the gun laws. It's the criminals that are not law-abiding that are not going to follow the laws. They're going to get the guns no matter how. They steal them. They're going to find a way to get them. And those are the ones that we have to worry about. Dennis, you kind of get the last few minutes here, to cap off this. How important is Michigan, do you think, going into this election and setting the stage for the presidential election 2 years from now?
Yeah, I'll just mention that the last time the Republicans nationally really had a semi-wave year was 2014 election that most people don't pay much attention to. It was between Obama beating Mitt Romney in 2012 and Trump upsetting Hillary Clinton in 2016. Nationally, it was a big year for the Republicans. But guess what? In Michigan, it really was not that great a year at all. Really? The incumbent governor, Republican, won by only 4%. He ran a terrible campaign. Gary Peters won an open seat as a Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate by a big margin. And, the Democrats did okay in Michigan. So honestly, despite everything you're reading and hearing that's going on so well for the Republicans nationally, and this is going to be a big red wave year, the way things are going here in Michigan, it doesn't look to me like it's going to be a big red wave year. I think it's going to be very, very close here. And Michigan may be an outlier and an exception to what happens everywhere else.
All right, Dennis.
Yeah, really quick. Yeah, I basically agree with Bill Ballenger. We're a very competitive state. We have an incumbent Democratic governor who's sharpening her message and has got a lot of money. National folks are not going to want to see her lose. So she's going to get all the support she needs. Michigan's usually a bellwether too when it comes to national elections. We're very, very important when it comes to the presidential election. So stay tuned.
All right, we are going to do that. I want to thank both you guys, Dennis Denno, Bill Ballenger, for joining us this afternoon. And I got to have both you guys back maybe after the August 2nd elections. Let's if you don't mind, let's get together and talk about what happened, how close we were and stuff. Dennis is the president of Denno Research. Bill Ballenger is the publisher of the Ballenger Report. I know, Dennis, your website is Denno Research, DENNO research.com. Bill, what's your website for listeners who want to follow up on this?
Just what you said, theballengerreport.com. That's it.
BALLENGER report.
GER, but make sure you put THE before it, theballengerreport.com.
All right, guys. Listen, first of all, thank you for joining me. It was a very interesting race. It'll be interesting to see what happens in that election. It looks like there's some interesting elections around the country, but it was great to have both of you guys on. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Ray.
All right.
Thanks, Ray.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'm Ray Hanania. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we will be talking with Congressman Sean Casten of the 6th District in Illinois. Let's take our break, and we'll be right back right after these messages.
ArabNews.com, bringing you breaking news from across the Middle East and the latest on Arabs in America. Get inside the latest headlines with expert analysis and insights at ArabNews.com. Join over 5 million Facebook fans and over 10 million monthly readers. ArabNews.com, news that matters to you.
Imagine you're on a train track. Somewhere miles away, a train is headed your way. You can't see it yet, but it's coming. Slowly but surely. If you have prediabetes or you're at risk for type 2 diabetes, you may be on the wrong track, and diabetes could be heading your way. Bit by bit, the danger is getting closer and closer. So should you stay on the track you're on now or move to make a change and reduce your risk? If you have prediabetes or you're at risk for type 2 diabetes, you may qualify for the National Diabetes Prevention Program in your local community. This one-year program could be the ongoing support you need to put you on the right track. Not only did participants lose weight, they cut their risk of type 2 diabetes in half. Ready to get on board for a healthier future? Learn more about the National Diabetes Prevention Program and what else you can do to manage and prevent diabetes at michigan.gov/diabetes. A message from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
At Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic in Dearborn, we provide effective physical therapy sessions in order to limit pain and discomfort. Top Rehab provides physical therapy care for any diagnosis prescribed by a physician, and we regularly see and treat conditions such as stroke, TMJ, fibromyalgia, sciatica, joint pain, and more. We use a variety of pain management methods, including modalities, soft tissue mobilization, and therapeutic exercise. If you're in need of physical rehabilitation or physical therapy, get the highest quality health care at Top Rehab. Most insurance is accepted, and we're open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday 8 to 6, Tuesday and Thursday 8 to 5, and Saturday 10 till 2. Call for an appointment today at 313-846-0555. That's 313-846-0555. Choose Top Rehab Physical Therapy Clinic on Michigan Avenue in Dearborn. Life's too short to be in pain.
Ziyad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Donna, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
Live performances, concerts, music festivals, and hot jazz. Moments like these are made possible by the COVID-19 vaccine. So let's work together to continue to be safe and protect each other. Keep those concerts going. Keep the togetherness going by keeping yourself protected and your COVID-19 vaccines up to date. To find your vaccine and learn more, visit michigan.gov/COVID vaccine. A message from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
The Ray Hanania Show is brought to you by the U.S. Arab Radio Network and sponsored by Arab News Newspaper, the Middle East's leading English language publication, with print and online editions in Saudi Arabia, Dubai, France, Japan, Pakistan, England, and the United States. Listen to live radio every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern in Detroit, Washington, D.C., New York, and Ontario, Canada. Or watch the live broadcast on Facebook.com/Arab News. The Ray Hanania Show is rebroadcast in Chicago at 12 noon on Thursday. For more information on the radio stations, live Facebook broadcast, and podcasts, visit ArabNews.com. And now, here's your host, columnist and U.S. Special Correspondent for Arab News, Ray Hanania.
And welcome to segment 2. My guest is Congressman Sean Casten of the former 6th District in Illinois, now running in the newly drawn 6th District, which includes much of Chicago's southwest suburbs and a small part of the city, I believe. And he's running against a rival, Congresswoman Marie Newman. Casten is a scientist, a clean energy entrepreneur and CEO, and he's dedicated his life to fighting climate change. Casten serves on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, and is vice chair of the House Financial Services Subcommittee on Investor Protection, Entrepreneurship, and Capital Markets. You know, all these titles, Congressman, government bureaucracy always makes them really long. You should see how long it takes for me to introduce someone from the State Department. You know, one of the departments is like 40 words sometimes, but he has.
We've got to do something to prop up our egos. You know, I mean, the titles are the easiest things we can dole out.
Well, listen, I just want to say thank you for joining us to come on this program and talk to us. I know that from my world as an Arab American, or at least from the world of Arab Americans, we think Arab issues run everything. Unfortunately, they don't. And I think the 6th District is going to come down to some of the other issues besides the Middle East. But I'd love to talk to you about a little bit about the Middle East district issues. And then we can talk about some of the other ones that I think are really going to drive the election results. You know, this district, I know the old 3rd District where Marie Newman was in. And by the way, I did invite her to come on to do a segment, not together, but separately. I haven't heard from her yet, and I'm hoping to do that. I invited her twice. The old 3rd District had one of the largest concentration of Palestinian Americans. And now when you see the redraw, it still seems like it's brought in a lot of area of Orland Park, which has a lot of Arabs. If you don't mind, let's talk just a little bit about the Middle East for the Arab voters that are in that district there. And of course, for our audience in the Middle East, they're interested in what some of the factors are. Take a look at, first of all, the Israel-Palestine issue. What's your perspective on it, and how do you look at that?
Well, I think, you know, unlike Jared Kushner, I'm not going to tell you that there's a simple solution to this. I've traveled to the region twice since getting elected. The first time primarily on the Israeli side, the second time primarily through the West Bank and going into Hebron and Ramallah and Bethlehem. And, you know, I'm struck by a couple things. Number one is that there is so much pressure in our U.S. system to be responsive to U.S. citizens who are advocates for the region. And I think it is so dangerous to only listen to those groups if you haven't spoken to folks on the ground. You know, every time I go there, we get in these conversations where, you know, when I've met with everyone from Prime Minister Shataya to Mahmoud Abbas to Benjamin Netanyahu and Yair Lapid this last time, everybody will tell Americans who are there that the system is very brittle. If you push us too hard, you'll see the rise of the right on the Israeli side. If you push us too hard, you'll see the rise of Hamas on the Palestinian side. And there's this tremendous pressure that says, please don't violate the status quo. And yet we all know that the status quo is untenable. I mean, I think the surest way to compromise the security of everyone in the region is to continue the status quo where you have a group of people with no property rights and increasingly little hope. And yet, when we're there, you know, we find ourselves saying, okay, there have been times in our history when the U.S. put pressure on the Israeli government to make sure that everybody in East Jerusalem could vote. Should we do that in this moment? And we hear voices on the Palestinian side, well, I don't know, because if you push that, you know, you might see Hamas. Then we said, well, you know, we have Palestinian communities who need representation. They don't have an embassy anymore. Should we push to create that embassy? That seems like a good thing that Congress should do. We're not taking sides. We're just saying we need to make sure that people We talked to a guy who runs the Hope Flower School that teaches nonviolence in Bethlehem. He doesn't have anyone to reach out to right now. So we raise that issue, and then we hear, well, be careful pushing that, because as you've seen, the Knesset is very narrowly divided right now. And if you push too hard, that might create the rise of the return of the Israeli political.
And you're talking about the consulate that they're talking about for Palestinian affairs in Jerusalem that they want to reopen?
Yeah, which was cut down by the Trump administration.
Right.
So now you've got this.
So are you in support of that, reopening that?
So I'm completely in support of that, but the challenge is how do we do that in a way that is responsive to the circumstances on the ground there? It doesn't pay attention. I mean, we had a situation when we were there where we had gone in the last time I was there, which was last February, I think. We'd gone in and met with several Palestinians who, they've got a farm up on the hill above their farm. There's essentially an outpost with armed settlers, who are regularly coming down shooting their livestock, and we're sitting there saying, we're members of Congress. Why don't we just walk up? And they were saying, no, they're not going to, you are going to get shot if you do that. Do not walk up there, which is weird. Normally, as members of Congress, you can go anywhere. We then come back and we met with Tom Nides, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, who's a lovely guy. And we start telling him about this. And it was clear that he was not aware of those realities on the ground, because as the ambassador to Israel, he cannot travel into that region except in a supervised fashion. And so we need, whatever we do with information is a separate question, but we need to have information. We have this blind spot in U.S. foreign policy right now. So number one, we need to be on the ground. The second thing that I'd say, which is, I find that if you look at sort of the, 100 years of global history, we had, the rise of the nation state, and the West Bank and Gaza are arguably the only two places in the world that went backwards. And by backwards, I mean, we had borders. Once we had nation states and all the land was claimed by nations, you then had some understanding of what the rule of law was between those borders. And after the 6-Day War, you had, several years after the 6-Day War, you had Egypt that said, we like this land for peace idea. We'll take the Sinai back, but we don't really want the people in Gaza, right? And then you had Jordan saying, well, I don't really want the people on the other side of the Jordan River. And so you're left with these two zones where we don't have any international rule of law for what applies in those areas. And we talk about them as nation states, but they don't exist as nation states. And I think it behooves all of the surrounding countries in the region. They have some role in doing that and in getting some resolution. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But I think framing that says these are two coherent countries with a border dispute misses the point that it's not a coherent country. It's a set of people who were abandoned.
We're in year 74 of a conflict that's been raging since 1948. And it's hard to tell people on both sides that are emotional that it's not going to be easily solved. So I think they, like in the Arab community in this new district, and I don't know if you had many contacts in your old district, which was pretty much more western suburbs, I believe, the old 6th district. Mm-hmm. Now you have a big segment of Palestinian Americans, and, to them, the issue is Palestine or nothing. I think it's a mistake, and I think we got to work with everybody. You came to the Arab American Democratic Club and spoke there, which I thought was very gracious. We had Marie Newman come there. I think some of the Arabs prefer her because she's been outspoken about some of these issues. But I think for you, it's kind of new, isn't it? Or have you had a big Arab population?
Well, there's a fairly sizable Muslim population in the current 6th district.
Right.
I don't. Obviously, there's plenty of Arabs who are not Muslims.
Right. I'd say about 75% of Muslims are non-Arab.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a new dynamic, I think, in this election for you.
Yeah. Look, I think there's a. Part of the job of being a member of Congress, you got to empathize with a whole lot of people who have different backgrounds than you. And if you're not thinking about who's not in the room, you're not doing the job. And a part of that is not assuming that any block of voters has only one issue, right? I think from a regional perspective over there, I think we can simultaneously acknowledge that sort of the evolution of the Palestinian cause with the rise of pan-Arabism and how much that sort of evolved out of Palestinian refugee camps, right, after, in the 50s and 60s. But then simultaneously how the feeling on the ground in Israel, I think there used to be a sense in Israel that there was no path to regional peace without a resolution of the Palestinian issue. And with the passage of the Abraham Accords, with the increasing concern about a nuclear Iran, the feeling that I get on the street when I talk to Israelis over there is that they've almost inverted that until we have regional peace, we don't need to worry about the Palestinian issue.
Right.
And I don't know how to solve that. I feel better about our opportunity to solve that when we have more centrist, more moderate Israeli governments.
Right.
Of course, the Israeli government has been very brittle now for 4 or 5 years.
I was going to say that there have been individual issues that have come up, and I know that it's not easy because the Israelis are very well organized. The Arabs are not. The Israelis understand marketing, communications. They can come in with press releases, media, and just wreak havoc in any district. And I'm not saying they're doing that in this new district. But the Palestinians, on the other hand, it seems to be driven by emotion. I mean, I'm Palestinian, Christian, and it does have a lot to do with emotion. So sometimes it gets very hard to address the real issues.
And that's what I was saying about, like, I think to address these issues, we have to understand how it affects the politics on the ground there.
Right.
Because it's easy to get caught up in, well, somebody came in my office yesterday, someone else came in my office Thursday. They felt really strongly about this, and I think I can win an election if I focus on this issue. And if that whole conversation happens in a bubble where you never go over and say, okay, what is the reality in the old city? What is the, if you've never stood on Mount Olive and sat there and said, okay, I look that way, I see Bethlehem, I look this way, I see an area that's been, has had some form of rather remarkable cohabitation for several thousand years, and understanding those dynamics of how, when we were last over there in February, we were sitting and our host said, every time something flares up, it happens right over there at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And mark my words, you can see the tension that's going on right now. You can see, what was happening in Sheikh Jarrah. There's going to be a flashpoint at this point when we have Passover and Ramadan and all coinciding. And he was right.
And you obviously, I think, have touched a chord with, at least I saw that J Street endorsed you. I know they endorsed both of you previously when you're running separate, but when the two of you came together, they endorsed you, and J Street is the moderate. I consider them the moderate Jewish voices. My wife is Jewish. I'm Palestinian Christian. My cousins are the pastors of the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. So anything that happens there just strikes home really quick. But let me check off a couple boxes. A two-state solution you supported, or do you think it's no longer feasible? Have you thought about it?
I absolutely support it, and I wish I could tell you that I saw a path to getting it done. I don't know how you have a democratic Jewish Israel that doesn't have two states with coherent borders. I will also share with you that I have yet to meet an Israeli leader who is committed to the idea that they don't have complete control of security, which is 1.5 states. And I've yet to meet a leader in the Palestinian Authority who doesn't have a business card that shows a map that runs from the Jordan to the sea.
And is it possible to address an issue like, the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh? She's a Christian an American citizen who was killed. Is it possible to address that without getting into all the politics? I mean, it's a crime. She's an American citizen. That definitely should be investigated, correct?
I would hope so. I think as you keenly surmised, there are a lot of pressures within our domestic politics, but I think we should be able to manage. I've always been partial to that beautiful line of Frederick Douglass's when he said that the best friend of a nation is he who acknowledges her faults, rather than cloak himself in the specious garb of patriotism. And he was, of course, talking about America, but I think in the same way, for the United States to be a good friend of Israel, as we are, we also have to be willing to say, as your friend, you're not perfect.
Can you support? I was just going to elaborate on that and say, can you say to the Israelis, I support your security, but there's certain lines that you shouldn't push, that, as you say, they're not perfect. I mean, don't shoot so many people. They kill, I think, 10 times more Palestinians than Palestinians kill Israelis. It's bad on both sides, but when you see that level, it makes you wonder if maybe there's something, the one stronger side is taking advantage of the situation more than the other side, which is more emotional.
Well, we have, for as long as I'm aware, all of our State Department funding has been very explicitly stated that anything that's done must be consistent with achieving a two-state solution. Is that always enforced? Is it even possible to enforce? I mean, how do you differentiate between civilian materials and military materials? I don't know that we do that perfectly, but I do think it's important that we always signal that there are, our foreign aid is a function of our foreign policy, and it needs to have that lever.
Now, I want to shift away to some of these other issues, and I'm sorry, the Middle East is so important. Mainly we're Arab audience, Arab radio, so we want to talk. And I think it's very gracious of you to come on the radio, because a lot of members of Congress won't come on and talk about the Middle East. They think it's a no-win situation, that there's, no matter what the middle ground is, emotions are going to kill you. But just talking about the issue of the President Biden, for example, I mean, there's this big concern that the Democrats are going to lose. Midterm elections traditionally go to the opposite party, when a president, of the president who holds the White House. Are you fearful that that's where we're headed in this election coming up this year?
Well, I am hugely concerned if we lose control of the House, because I was there on January 6th and watched the majority of my Republican colleagues vote to destroy our democracy. And it deeply troubles me that it has become so partisan to suggest that we continue to preserve our democracy. So that scares me. Having said that, I am more optimistic than a lot of the polling would be. And my optimism comes from the fact that I came in 2018, biggest freshman class since Watergate, flipped 40 seats ish. I don't remember the exact number. And for those of us who came in that class, myself, Alyssa Slotkin, Lauren Underwood, Abby Spanberger, Tom Malinowski, Andy Kim, Jason Crow, Katie Porter, go on and on down the line. Every one of those people, we won because, not just because we got Democrats to vote for us, but because we convinced Republicans that we actually have more in common than divides us. And number one, I think that's what we need as a country. But number two, we had some polling recently that said every sitting member of Congress that is a frontliner, meaning we're roughly speaking in districts that are D+5 or worse. And then in the new 6th is a D+5 seat. So this isn't like the old, like Dan Lipinski wins by 40 points. This is generic Democrat would win here by 5 points.
That district's going to stay solid Democrat no matter what.
No, it's not. This is much more like the current 6. This seat went from a D+2 to a D+4 or 5. It still is a very purple seat, but for those of us in those seats, we are outpolling the president by 14 points.
Really?
And that's not surprising, because there is the national Democratic message, which is the message we use when we are talking to Democrats. And then there's the way that those of us who flipped seats got elected. And we flipped these seats because we told a bigger story that's more inclusive of all the population. And I think as long as you remember, Joe Biden is not on the ballot.
Right. So if you can go directly to voters with those issues, what's the most important issue, do you think, when you talk? Because you did flip the old 6th district. You took it from a Republican and made it a Democratic district. What's the big issue you think is going to win this election?
Well, let me talk first. And so in 18, Peter Roskam had won by 18 points, and I won by 7 on the same ballot that J.B. Pritzker lost by 5. And my theory of the case at that time, which is still true, is that people will respect you if you disagree as long as you're present, right? I did a town hall on inflation this week. It was like flypaper for angry Republicans. But I thought it was important for us to say, you've got views, let's be out there and do it. I did town halls on impeachment. I did a town hall after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. These are issues where I think it's, and not like a topic at a town hall, an entire town hall dedicated to that. And what I've found is that folks, I think it's very rare that you lose an election because people disagree with you on a single issue, but they want to know that they respect that in a hard point, you're going to take all the facts in and you're going to respect them and be out there for it. And I think that matters. And to do that for everybody, not just your party. As far as this election, if you asked me this question 3 weeks ago, I'd say it would be about inflation and crime. If you ask me this week, Roe versus Wade is now back in it. Gun crime is still there, except that it was gun crime 2 weeks ago based about, replacement theory. And now it's gun crime of what the heck just happened in Texas. And why did the Uvalde police officers not stand up? And why do we have so many guns in our society? Unfortunately, the news cycle keeps moving, but I think those issues will be consistently there.
That's what voters are looking for? You think those answers to those?
Yeah, if you ask people what they're anxious about, those are the big things they're anxious about. At the same time, I think what I've found is that if you ask people, are you anxious about the direction of the country, you get an overwhelming yes. If you ask people, are you better off now than you were 2 years ago, you also get an overwhelming yes. And I think just giving a point to remind people that you remember 2 years ago and 3 years ago when you woke up in the morning and had to turn on your phone to see if the president had blown up the world or banned somebody else from coming to our country or said that there were fine people on both sides or threatened to break up NATO or, suggested, not arming Ukraine against Russia, or the economy was in free fall or COVID was a hoax. Like, we're a lot better off than we were a couple of years ago. And you can see it in people's outlooks. And I think reminding people that we got to this point because of all the hard work we did over the last couple of years. And, when you may not always agree with the adults, but it's nice having the adults in charge.
I think part of your message was really important. Just being there, being available, talking to people, even if you don't agree with them, you got to be there and let them see that, because I agree with you. It's not one issue. I've covered politics 45 years. It sounds like it's one issue, but it's not really one issue. It's a lot of issues. And are you responsive? And I think you've, we've only just recently met, but I feel you've been very responsive, and I appreciate the fact that you're joining us. We only have like 90 seconds left. And I know that I really wanted to get into climate change because I know that that's one of your big areas. Is there a way to change it in 60 seconds or less? Can we reverse climate change, or is it so impossible because it's not just the US, it's the whole world we got to deal with?
Well, the single biggest opportunity we have with climate change is that you can't build clean energy without also building cheap energy. And so the more we deploy these solutions, the more it feeds on itself. If your neighbor has solar panels and doesn't pay for electricity anymore, it kind of tempts you into doing the same thing, right? And so I think if we embrace that deployment, the challenge we have is that converting to clean energy also means a massive wealth transfer from the energy producing parts of the country to the energy consuming parts of the country. And the political challenge, and the thing that we will not get through this until we address the politics, is how do we make sure that all the wealth we're going to create is evenly spread and people don't feel left behind in this transition. We've been working to do that. We've got a lot of provisions in the climate rules that we're doing. But folks in those regions, in West Virginia and Louisiana, they are nervous about whether we're going to look out for them because historically the government hasn't.
All right, Congressman, I got to say thank you. It was a real pleasure to have you on. I'm Ray Hanania. Our guest, Sean Casten, the congressman from the 6th District, our guest this afternoon. I appreciate it, Congressman. It's very generous for you to come on and talk issues with us. You have a great week.
Thank you for having me, Ray. Always a pleasure.
All right, we'll talk again. Thank you. And I hope you guys join us next week here at the Ray Hanania Show at Arab News Go to facebook.com/Arab News to watch the streaming podcast of this show. Have a great week, everybody. We'll talk to you next week when we have the brother of Shireen Abdul Akal joining us to talk about his sister. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.